But hey, you know what time it is right now?
Call of Duty Mobile?
Call of Duty. No, it's time to make the show better. Let's go.
Oh.
It's just about time to get to some wonderful comments that clearly make the show better. I just wanted to remind people of the options, patreon.com/MinnMax2Ns. Hey, it's time to give thanks to everybody that's supporting us on Patreon. We only exist because of people's generosity and support. Hey, this show's not over yet. Boys, we got a lot to cover, including saying thanks to everybody that supports us on Patreon. If you've enjoyed this episode so far, you can thank the supporters at our Patreon, patreon.com/MinnMax2Ns. Hey, we're a Patreon, Jeffem. Are you aware of that?
Oh, we are?
Yeah, we as people are now a Patreon.
Oh.
You know that Patreon lifestyle, JV. You know how this works?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so we have wonderful supporters. People go to patreon.com/MinnMax2Ns. Hey, do you guys know how this whole thing runs?
Patreon.
That's right. Patreon.com/MinnMax.
2Ns.
Hey, good job, Kyle. See, you're right on top of it, man. Hey, the only reason we're in this basement recording this podcast is because of the community and the support of the community on Patreon. Patreon.com/MinnMax2Ns. Hey, you know how this whole thing operates? Wonderful Patreon supporters. Patreon.com/ Thank you. Yep, MinnMax2Ns. Cyril, do you know how this whole thing operates? What keeps us in this frozen basement?
Yeah.
Bubbly.
But
That's right.
bubbly and a lack of air condition or a lack of heating. But Patreon.
Patreon.com/MinnMax2Ns. And Anna, do you know how this whole thing operates? You know what fumes we're running on?
Yeah, I think so.
And it's a
Patreon.
It's a Patreon. There we go. Patreon.com/MinnMax2Ns. Do you all know how this whole thing operates?
I had no idea.
MinnMax, that is?
Bubbly water?
That's right. It's mainly sparkling water.
there.
Hey, do you know how this whole thing operates, Jeffem?
On bubbly.
On bubbly.
I used that joke before.
Okay, take it again.
On Pikachu skateboard.
No, Patreon. Patreon.com/MinnMax2N. Hey, you know how this whole thing operates? You know what we're doing down here? We're
Patreon.
making. You got it. Yeah, I was going to go with a more eloquent response, but you got it. Hey, do you guys know how this whole thing operates?
2Ns.
You got it. What a well-oiled team we are here in the MinnMax basement. Jeffem, do you know how this whole thing operates?
On Gatorade now.
Hey, only Gatorade.
The third drink.
I've already signed my own deals on the side. I'm just
Nice.
No, it's Patreon.
Was that? Sorry.
Just pouring it over
Blocking
the
the logo with your
microphone.
hand.
Man, just my electrolyte were a little low. I'm sorry.
Boost it back up.
Do you guys know how this whole thing operates?
Discord.
Patreon.
It's a little bit of everything, yeah. Surreal, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Patreon.
Wow, correct answer. Surreal Vasquez, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Patreon.
You got it, baby. Patreon.com/MinnMax2Ns. Jeffem, do you know how this whole thing operates here?
Magic.
Magic, everybody. The magic of the community coming together on Patreon.com/MinnMax2Ns. Hey, Kyle, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Is it a Patreon?
It is
Ben
a
Hanson?
Patreon. That is what MinnMax is all about. Patreon.com/MinnMax. Although you can probably go to MinnMax.com/Patreon. I think it also will take you to information about the Patreon. Jeffem, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Spider juice?
Spider juice. Jeffem, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Alcohol.
Well, hey, do you know how this whole thing operates, Jeffem?
Patreon.
I love it when you give up for a joke.
This time.
Kyle, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Is it a Patreon, Hanson?
Hell yeah, it is. Patreon.com/MinnMax2Ns. Dan, do you know how this whole thing operates, the whole MinnMax thing?
In terms of what?
How? What's keeping us afloat?
It's Patreon.
Hey, there we go. Patreon.com/MinnMax2Ns. A bunch of very generous people. Jeffem, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Patreon.
Beautiful. Thank you for taking
got
the
it
pause
right.
just to really think about if you should go for a joke. Charles McGregor, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Bubbly.
Bubbly. It's largely based on bubbly. Yeah, you got it. I see you've watched the MinnMax show before.
I mean, I might be a fan. Maybe.
Well, I like that 'cause
No,
you're-
I think it's Patreon.
That's right. Do you guys know how this whole thing operates?
Is it that like Destiny? It's kind of how Destiny does it.
Yeah, it's a Destiny-based model. Anna, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Yeah, we use a Patreon.
Yeah, Patreon.com/MinnMax2N. Kyle, do you know how this whole thing operates? By that I mean,
Patreon?
yeah. By that I mean MinnMax, not serialized abuse in the industry.
We're a Patreon, Ben Hanson.
Okay,
We're
thank
supported
you.
by folks who are support us on Patreon. I don't know. I was going somewhere with that, but then I.
It's a beautiful transition. Yes,
it's
Jeffem, do you know how this whole thing operates?
LaCroix Limoncello.
Hey, Jeff Marchiafava, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Well, not bubbly orange.
Correct.
Oh, now it does. It counts. It's back again.
Leo, do you know how this whole thing operates?
From viewers like you?
That's right, Patreon supporters like you. Hey, Jacob Geller, do you know how this whole indie thing operates on our end?
Intellectual property?
That's right. Hey, anyways, Leo, do you know how this whole Patreon operates?
Viewers like you?
Anna, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Yeah, we are part of a Patreon.
Yeah, we are the Patreon. Leo, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Our beautiful supporters on Patreon?
That's right. Keeps this whole indie trainer rolling. Marcus, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Believe it is via Patreon.
Via Patreon. Viva Patreon, I say. Cyril, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Patreon.
Patreon.com/MinnMax to wins. Well, hey, I was meaning to ask you, Cyril, do you know how this whole thing operates?
SEO stuff.
SEO stuff primarily.
I know Patreon.
There we go. Patreon.com/MinnMax to wins. Let's see, Jacob Geller, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Is it selling unupgraded classics for a limited amount of time?
Leo, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Patreon.com/MinnMax Show's vast array of patrons?
That's right. Yeah, for sure. And Leo, I've been meaning to ask you, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Oh, it's on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah, take your time.
Support from our generous patrons?
That's right. All right, now with Jake out of the picture, we can get down to what really matters. Our Patreon supporters. Which reminds me, Cyril, do you know how this whole thing operates?
I'm completely lost. I don't know. You could have possibly hinted at that. I believe, though, it's Patreon.
That's right. Patreon.com/MinnMax to wins. Leo,
Hey.
do you know how this whole thing operates?
No.
Jeff, I am so thankful that you're here because I've been meaning to ask you. Do you know how this whole thing operates?
On dirty diapers.
Dirty diapers primarily, everybody. That's right. Find your dirty diapers at patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. Hey, Anna, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Yeah, there is this website. It's called Patreon, and we have a profile on it.
Yeah, that's right. And you can find it. It's kind of like a secret shortcut. It's if you go to like that white bar at the top of your browser and you type in patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's, you can find a lot of fun things. Hey, Jeffem, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Bug snacks.
Hey, Leo.
Hey, man. What's up?
Yeah, not much. I was just wondering if you knew how this whole thing operated.
I knew it.
Yeah.
I knew. That's the only reason you have to talk to me.
Just answer the question, please. I need
Patrons!
Woo! Wonderful patrons at patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. Hey, Jeff, I brought you here to answer one trivia question. A little riddle I like to give newcomers. Do you know how this whole thing operates?
Aprons? Aprons.
Patrons. Patrons. There it is, everybody. Patreon.com/MinnMax 2 N's. Leo, how many people do you think have typed in literally patreon.com/MinnMax 2 N's and tried to spell it all out?
Yeah, probably 1-to-1. Everybody who's ever heard us say that.
Yeah.
Well,
You haven't
I did
seen
that
the
one
Patreon
time.
that I made, did you, Hanson?
Hello?
Do you know how this whole thing operates?
So I plug in the mic and it goes into the court, and then I'm talking to you through the internet, which Al Gore invented, and then that's part of our Patreon.
Jeffem, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Apples?
Hey, Leo.
Hey, man.
I've been meaning to ask you, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Dude, you ask that every episode. Why don't you just figure it out? Why do you always rely on us?
I keep forgetting.
It's the lovely support from our patrons.
That's right. Patreon.com/MinnMax 2 N's. Oh, Kyle, I mean to ask you, do you know how this whole thing operates?
I believe, Hanson, I could be wrong about this, but I believe we're supported by patrons on Patreon.
That's right. Patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's, everybody. Oh boy. You know what this reminds me of, everybody? It reminds me of a story.
Patrons?
Leo, do you have a little campfire you could light up? Because I got a wonderful story to tell.
Of course.
Maybe the last campfire, if you can track it down.
Yeah, do you want to start up the last campfire? Okay, great. Leo, sit back and relax. I'm going to tell you the story about a wonderful place. It's my favorite place under the sun, and it's patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. You wouldn't believe how many amazing different options are there for you if you want to support MinnMax for creating content this year. Hey, Leo, I've been to ask you, how does this whole thing operate?
You ask me this every week, man.
I just like it.
It's patrons. It's our kind patrons.
The kind patrons have done it all. Yeah, if you go to patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. Leo, do you know how this whole thing operates?
I'm taking a wild guess here, and I hope you don't judge me for getting it wrong. Is it support from our patrons on Patreon?
It is lovely support from the Patreon supporters. Hey, Suriel, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Let me see. I've done research on this.
Yeah.
You gave me this assignment earlier. I checked with I did a Freedom of Information Act with Congress, and they've revealed to us that it is through Patreon.
It is. We didn't want it to get out, but now that it's out, we should just tell people. It's patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. Hey, Suriel, do you know how this whole thing operates?
I'm gonna give you a hint.
Please.
Okay. Patreon.
That's right. So we have some plugs. Let's see. Kyle, do you know how this whole thing operates?
You know, I've heard rumor that it's a Patreon.
That's right.
But I can't confirm this or deny it.
I can actually confirm it for you. It's patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. Hey, you know what I like? I like asking Suriel how this whole thing operates.
Yeah, so you can look for my new season of podcast where I break down exactly what the mystery of how this whole thing operates. But I will give a quick teaser is that it's Patreon.
Hey, Dan, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Whole thing.
Whole thing, like the reason that we're able to be here on the cool internet airwaves.
You got a Patreon.
That's right. Hey, Jeff Marchiafava.
That's
do you know how this whole thing operates?
Super consistent internet.
Kyle, do you know how this whole thing operates?
I have no clue.
Well, the answer is
sometime.
The answer, Kyle, is patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. You can go there. Jeff, do you know how this whole thing operates?
That would be Patreon, sir.
That's right. Patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. Jeff, you know how this whole thing operates?
Magic.
Anyways, thank you to everybody who supports us. I'm sorry, Leo. Where do they support us?
On what? What is it? Patreon?
That's right. Patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. Hey, Jeff, do you know how this whole thing operates? Pedicure.net, everybody.
Yes.
Patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. Kyle, do you know how this whole thing operates? Do you know how we exist?
I think people offer us money out of the kindness of their hearts, but I don't know where
offer
they put it.
Us money
somewhere or something.
Hey, patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's is where you go to support MinnMax. We appreciate all the support to help us keep growing. Suriel?
Yes?
Did you think the arrows were too big? No. Do you know how this whole thing operates?
Yeah, I went on the deep web to find out, but it turns out that if you cash in enough Bitcoins, you unlock a web page called patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. But then I learned you can just Google it, or you can just put it into your web browser, and it works the same way.
It's like a life hack, man. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Hey, Jacob Geller, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Through clever webcam technology.
That's it. You got it. Let's see. Jeff, do you know how this whole thing operates?
It operates on Leo's dancing.
That's right, which you can find at patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's, everybody. Thanks for... Hey, Janet, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Yeah, I think it's a site called Patreon.
Yeah, patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. Hey, Leo, do you know how this whole thing operates? It goes a little something like this. PATR. I know, we gotta come up with a jingle at some point. Patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. Suriel, do you know how this entire thing operates?
Well, I believe I was talking to Imran earlier, and he's able to confirm that it is through Patreon.
It is. Because there were a lot of
story
rumors.
up on Fanbyte right now.
Yeah,
is that
about
true?
how this whole thing operates.
Those dirty dogs got our scoop. Leo, how does this whole thing operate?
You still don't know?
I don't know. Tell me,
That's
please.
embarrassing,
I
dude.
know.
It's Patreon supporters.
Oh, that's right. We exist because of people going on Patreon and unlocking wonderful benefits. Hey, Jeffem, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Orchestra music.
Orchestra
And
music.
Harmonic Unleashed specifically.
Oh, I love orchestra music. I also love patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. You go. Hey, Kyle, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Is it E3 vibes?
Jeffem, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Unbuttoned hot pants?
Yeah, mainly hot pants. Yeah, which you can find at patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. Suriel, do you know how this whole thing operates?
I take a big swig of Patreon.
That's right. Janet, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Yeah, I believe it's a place called Patreon.
That's right. Jeffem and Leo. It's patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. But hey, Kyle, do you know how this whole thing operates? How this whole podcast exists?
Is it a sword with a personality that talks to you periodically?
That's exactly it. We should remind people that, Kyle, this whole thing exists because of
viewers like you.
Viewers like you and listeners like you and everyone that goes to patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's and supports us. Hey, Dan, do you know how this whole thing operates?
A computer?
One computer. And if you go inside the computer, you can find patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. That does remind me, though, Jeffem, I do not mean to cut you off, but I've been meaning to ask, do you know how this whole thing operates and how we're able to record this podcast?
Blood Bowl 3.
That's right, which can be found at patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. Kyle, do you know how this whole thing operates, by the way?
Gosh, I think it's Patreon.
That's right, it is Patreon. That's right, patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. Hey, Kyle, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Is it Patreon?
That's right. It's Patreon, everybody. If you enjoy this podcast, you can support it or join it over at patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. Hey, Jeffem, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Astral Juice.
Astral Juice primarily, which can be found at patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. If you like this, Jacob Geller, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Online invasions.
Online invasions primarily. That's right. Hey, Leo, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Patrons like you?
Patrons like you. Jeffem, do you know how this whole thing operates, by the way?
Square Enix characters?
Square Enix characters, everybody. Hey, Mike Drucker, you know, hang on, how do you do this? Did you know that we're a Patreon?
Now that you told me, I did.
All right, that's good enough for us. Hey, Jeffem, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Froggy chairs.
Sarah, you're here just in time because I've been dying to tell you about something.
Yeah.
You know, like that thing you use every day, the computer, and like how there's that box on the top that's typically white and you can like type stuff in there? Like the URL bar?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Do you know it?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Great. Jeffem, seriously, listen up, dude. It turns out we exist only because people go to that and then they type in www.patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. Can you believe it? Isn't that wild? I don't know.
we believe it. Sorry, we're not in awe. We know how this process works.
Yeah, not in awe, nodding off. Leo, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Can I have time to think about it?
Yeah. How much do you need?
20 minutes?
Okay, yeah. Let's see. Janet, while Leo's thinking, do you know how this whole thing operates?
I do, but I wouldn't want to undermine Leo and his process. I want to give him time to discover the answer on his own.
Okay, great. Sarah, I've been meaning to ask you, if you were like a viewer or a listener of the show and you wanted to either join it or support it, do you know where you could go?
I believe there's something called a Patreon. A Patreon.
That's right, everybody. Patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. Let the man think, Janet, please. Hey, Kyle Hilliard, that is. Do you know how this whole thing operates?
What's up? Patreon. Right to the point this week, Hans.
Sarah, you came just in time to answer this riddle that has stumped us for eons, which is, do you know how this whole thing operates?
I believe, Ben. I believe it's a Patreon, patreon.com.
Hey, Sarah, do you know how this whole podcast exists and how this whole thing operates?
Yes, it's because of patreon.com/MinnMax Show with 2 N's. Is this MinnMax?
Just MinnMax, you got it!
I get confused because our Twitter handle has a show on it.
I know, I really wish we could have MinnMax, but some schmuck is squatting on it. Anyways, hey, Kyle, do you know how this whole thing operates? Do you know why this podcast exists?
I mean, I think we're doing it to prevent a planet from getting swallowed up by a black hole, right?
That's right. That's right. Which you can help with by going to patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. We appreciate your support. Hey, Leo, do you know how this whole thing operates?
I keep thinking I'm going to figure it out next time. I got to remember to look it up before I go back on the show because it's so embarrassing when Hanson asks me and I never know.
Here's a little hint. It goes P, it goes A, it goes T, it goes R, it goes E, it goes O, it goes N, it goes dot, / whatever. MinnMax, everybody, with 2 N's. Kyle, do you know how this whole thing operates?
I think it's Patreon.
You know it's Patreon, baby. Before we do that, I've been meaning to ask the world whether they know how this whole thing operates. What do you say, world? They all say yes. Stop asking us. That's right, everybody. Patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. City. And also, what's this at the bottom? Number 21, Bravely Default 2. And then number 22 is Patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. Hey, Leo, do you know how this whole thing operates?
Yeah.
That's right, everybody. Patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. Sarah, do you know how this whole thing operates?
It's Patreon.
Sarah, thank you for being here. I've been meaning to ask you, do you know how this whole thing operates and why this thing exists?
No.
Well, Sarah, you see.
Tag me in.
Yeah, Kelsey, please.
Is it Patreon?
Oh my God, thank you, Kelsey. That's right. Patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's, everybody. All right. Hey, Jeff, do you know how this whole thing operates?
On premonitions.